On today's video, my dad and I are going to go through a quick overview on how to process a deer at home.
Full shank bone with shoulder bones.
Okay, outdoor YouTubers, well, you got a deer and you want to process it up yourself. Awesome. And you know, it's probably a lot easier than you think. You don't need a specialized shop or special equipment. All you really need is a rope to hang the deer, a sharp knife, and a saw. In this video, we're going to be going through processing a deer start to finish. We're going to touch on gutting, skinning, breaking the deer down into manageable pieces, deboning these pieces, and we'll go over which pieces make good steaks and which pieces are better suited for roasts, grind, stew meat, or canning. Now again, this video is a quick overview on deer processing, but you might be looking for a few more details on a specific part or parts of this video. So, as we go through each step of processing a deer, I will reference longer, more detailed videos on each one of these steps. Links to these videos can be found in chronological order in the description of this video. Now, keep in mind, this isn't the only way to process a deer, but my dad is a career meat cutter, and he's cut up literally thousands of white-tailed deer, and this method has worked for him over the course of all those deer. And keep in mind that the suggestions that we give for utilizing the different cuts of meat are just that. They are just suggestions. There are many different ways to utilize the meat from a deer. Okay, let's get started. Step 1, field dressing or gutting the deer. Doing this right really does help out in the processing of the deer. I like to gut the deer out in the field. It lightens the load for dragging the deer out of the woods, and when I gut the deer, I remove the anus and everything in the anal cavity. For more details on gutting a deer, check out the links in the description. Step 2, hanging the deer. We like to hang our deer head up. No gambrel needed, just a rope around the antlers or neck, sling it over a rafter or a tree branch, and hang the deer. We do normally use a small pulley system to make it easier, but it's not necessary. If you're interested in more of the reasons that we hang the deer head up, check out the links in the description. It's always a good idea to leave the deer hang a few days if you have appropriate temperatures. Think of it like a steak in the refrigerator. If your deer is hanging in temperatures in the mid-30s to low 40s Fahrenheit, it'll be fine for several days. Most agree that this aging of the deer while it hangs does improve the taste of the venison. Now, if you want venison for supper, but you haven't cut the deer up yet, one great option is to pop out these tenderloin steaks from the chest cavity. These are some of the best tasting steaks on the entire deer. Just trim off some of the fat, flash fry them in a hot pan, and celebrate the hunt. All right. These are the tenderloins. Step 3, skinning the deer. If you skin the deer right away after you harvest it, the skin will come off a lot easier, but if you leave the skin on till you're ready to process it, that's okay too. It's going to help us to remove the ends of the legs first. One method is to use a meat saw. Anytime you use the saw, go ahead and cut away the skin, meat, and tendons with a knife first, and then use the saw to cut through the bone. The saw will work a lot better that way. Another way to get the ends of the legs off is just to cut through the joint with just a knife. Then we want to make a few cuts just under the skin. These cuts will allow us to pull the skin off a lot easier. Start with the front legs and cut up and over. You can actually follow the natural hairline of the deer if you want. It's always a good idea to cut from the inside outward. If you cut from the outside inward, you're more likely to push hair into the meat. Just be careful not to let the knife slip back at you as you're cutting this way. We definitely want to take our time and do everything we can to keep the hair off the meat. Then we'll continue this cut right up the neck, and we'll make a circle cut around the top of the neck. Now we can start pulling this skin down and off. Places where the skin doesn't want to pull off very easily, use the knife to help you out. Otherwise, just keep pulling down. Once I get down to the hind legs, I will make a cut along the length of each leg. Keep pulling downward, or you can grab a fistful of skin and use your legs to push the skin off. Now our deer is skinned. You want more details on skinning a deer? Check out the description. Step 4, breaking the deer down into manageable pieces. This method works great for hunters that might not have a large enough workspace to hold an entire deer. You might have that deer hanging in the yard outside your house. You might have that deer hanging on the camp buck pole. But either way, we can break this deer down into manageable pieces, bring these pieces into the house or camp, and debone them one at a time at the kitchen table. First up, the front shoulder. These come off relatively easy with just a knife. Just follow the natural seam. If you hit bone, cut closer to the main body of the deer, and the shoulder should just come right off. And of course, we want to do both sides. Next up, the hindquarters. Cut this section off with the knife, and then finish it off with the saw. A meat hook helps out with this, or have a buddy grab the hinds as you cut with the saw. Once the hinds are on the bench or table, they can be cut down the middle with the saw. Now make sure you have a dedicated saw for doing deer. The saw that you use for processing up a deer should not be the same saw that you use to cut sewer pipe with. Now, as we continue on with this deer, some of the pieces of meat will be set aside for steaks. Generally speaking, these will be the larger, more solid pieces of meat that don't have a lot of fat in them. Venison fat does not have a good flavor like beef fat does. The rest of the meat will be set aside for grinding into burger, stew meat, or canning. These are generally going to be the smaller pieces, or pieces that contain a lot of fat, or pieces that were cut away from the steaks. We refer to these pieces as the trim meat. And we will usually put our trim meat into a bucket or a tub. Another thing to keep in mind as you're processing up your deer is to trim away any bloodshot pieces of meat. We don't want to eat those. And stay away from areas that the bullet or arrow passed through. These areas could contain small pieces of broken bone or undesirable blood and guts. The next section to remove is the rib cage area of the deer. Basically, what's left from the neck down. But before we do that, this is a good, convenient time to peel off some of that brisket and flank meat. This will be set aside as trim meat. Then make a cut at the base of the neck with the knife and go ahead and finish it off right through with the saw. And then go ahead and do the same thing with the neck. Now the deer is broke down into manageable pieces. And like I said earlier, this can be done one piece at a time as you debone each piece, or all at once if you have the space to lay them down. For more on breaking the deer down, check out the links in the description. Now, if you have a large cutting surface to work on, great. We've always used cardboard to cut our deer on. We use clean cardboard and we wipe it down with food-grade alcohol. Cardboard makes for easy cleanup. When you're done, you just fold it all up and throw it away. But I make no claims as to the health safety of any of the cardboard that you might be using. So use a cutting surface that you feel comfortable with. Next up is deboning all these pieces. Generally speaking, deboning these just means removing the meat from the bones. And as you're deboning all the parts of the deer, don't worry if you don't get every little piece of meat off the bone on your first try. It's no problem to go back to those bones and shave off any little pieces of meat that you missed and throw it in with the trim meat. So, step 5, deboning the front shoulders. The front shoulders have smaller muscle groups with fat throughout, so we generally like to take the meat from these front shoulders and put it in with our trim meat. There's a lot of bone structure in these front shoulders, but if you take your time, there's a lot of meat there too. Want more details on deboning the front shoulders? Check out the links. Step 6, deboning the hindquarters. Now, just like the front shoulders, the hindquarters have quite a bit of bone structure in them. But the hindquarters do have larger, solid pieces of meat that make for good steaks. Again, take your time and follow the bone structure. This shank meat will go into the trim. Remove the larger solid pieces. The bones and the natural seams in the meat will help guide you. Take these larger pieces of solid meat and trim off any fat and loose edges, then set them aside in your steak pile.
You'll hit the tail bone down in here and it will come right off. And that is out here a little ways, so probably about right here. You can take your knife and make a good square cut off of there. This is sort of actually
Want more details on deboning the hinds? Check out the links. Step 7. Deboning the chest midsection. The first thing you want to do here is remove those tenderloins if you didn't remove them from the deer while it was hanging. Again, these are some of the best steaks on the entire deer. Then you can shave off any meat left on the sides of the ribs. This will go with our trim meat. The ribs themselves can be cut off and cooked whole, or they can be picked through, and you can get that meat out from between the bones and go ahead and add that to the trim pile. Now, the second best steaks on the entire deer are also found in this section. And they are a lot easier to remove if you do go ahead and cut those rib bones off first. These loin steaks are located on each side of the spine. You just cut along the spine and down along those ribs, and you can pull out a nice long strip of loin steaks. You may find it easier to cut this bone structure in half. That way you don't have to deal with such a long piece of meat while you're removing it. Again, the bone structure guides you as you're removing these loin steaks. Don't forget to shave off the silver skin from these steaks. The silver skin lacks flavor, and it'll only cause these steaks to curl up in the frying pan. Want more details on loin removal? Check out the links. Step 8. Boning out the neck. First step is to take this good chunk of meat out from underneath the esophagus or the lower side of the neck and put it with the trim meat. Then go ahead and cut that esophagus out. Put this neck piece down on the cutting table with that esophagus side facing down, and then shave a thin piece of meat off the back of the neck. This will expose a tough white leader that you want to remove. You do not want to eat that. Then work your way down one side of the neck and take off this nice slab of meat. The spine has a lot of knobs to it, so your knife is going to be going back and forth as you take these slabs off. And go ahead and do the same thing to the other side. These two hunks of meat will be great for grind or roasts. Okay, now that we have the meat separated from the bones, it's time to do a little fine tuning. The steak pieces that we set aside can be cut to your desired thickness and packaged up for the refrigerator or freezer. And we're also going to want to go through those trim pieces and remove some of the fat. The amount of fat that you remove from the trim pieces really depends on how much time and effort you want to put into it. Now, the more fat that you get off, the better, but it's not reasonable to think that you're going to get every speck of the fat off. Then, if you're going to can this meat, cut it up into canning size pieces. If you're going to grind it up, cut it up into sizes that are appropriate for your grinder. If it's going to be stew meat, cut it up into stew meat sizes. Want more details on venison burger or venison sausage? Check out the links. All right, the last step is just to enjoy many meals of venison from a deer that you processed up yourself. And hey guys, if you want to watch more videos on deer hunting, deer camp, and deer processing, be sure to check out the whole channel. And also, remember to hunt, fish, laugh, repeat. Thanks for watching, and God bless.